Hey, so my name is Ryuji. I'm an independent filmmaker and animal activist. I went vegan in 2015. And if you had told me that would ever happen, I would not have believed you. Growing up, I ate meat, dairy, and eggs every single day, 3 times a day. And I thought that was what I was gonna do for the rest of my life. But in the year 2015, like I said, I read a book called Sapiens, A Brief History of Humankind. And it's a history book, and it talks about not just the events that happened, but why we ended up in the situation that we're in today. So why is it that humans took over the world? What is the role of things like religion and imperialism and capitalism? And in that book, there's a section about modern farming. And what the author explains is that modern farming is a business. And what that means is that the animals who produce the products of that business are seen as commodities, which means that if we have to do something to the animals in order to make a cheaper product, they're gonna do it. So one example that was given in the book was that in the egg industry, only female hens lay eggs. And so male chicks are basically useless. I mean, what are they gonna do with them? They don't grow fast enough to become meat chickens, and they don't lay eggs. So what do? They just get rid of them. And the way they do that is they have them go down this conveyor belt and they drop them into this giant industrial blender that blends them up alive. And that was so shocking to me. I ate eggs every day for breakfast. It was my favorite thing in the world to eat. And yet I didn't realize that this was causing so much suffering and death to so many animals. And when I learned about that and other things that happens to animals in the meat and dairy industry, I started to think, is this something that I want to support? And one thing that the author was talking about is how the reason that most people support those industries is not because we're bad people and we wake up in the morning thinking, you know what I want to do today? I want to harm a pig and eat bacon. No, we're just indifferent. We're so disconnected. It's out of sight, out of mind. And so I thought to myself, that's not a way that I want to live. I don't want to not think about this. I want this to end, right? Eventually I asked myself the question, which I think is the most important question I ever asked myself when it comes to animals or really trying to do the right thing, is what if it was me? And I asked myself, what if it was me who was in the position of those animals? And I realized that I would never want to be in that position. And if that's the case, then what justification do I have to put them in that position? And that's when I stopped consuming animal products. And at the time, funny enough, I didn't know the word vegan. And a friend came up to me and he said, hey Ryuji, so we just ate fried chicken together 3 weeks ago, and now you don't do that anymore. So are you a vegetarian? Are you vegan? What's the deal? And I said, let me get back to you. I went back to my room, typed on Google, what's the difference between vegan and vegetarian? And I found the definition of veganism, which basically said that vegans don't contribute to things that hurt animals, not just with food, but with clothing or entertainment or cosmetics that are tested on animals. And I was like, that makes sense. If I can live in a way that doesn't contribute as far as I can to things that hurt animals, why in the world would I not do that? After all those things that I did do that hurt animals are not things that I intentionally did. I was just born into a world where it's normal to do those things. But I never elected or chose to do those things. And so when I became aware of it, I was like, I'm now gonna choose to not do that. And that's when I became vegan.
Wow. Weren't you worried about maybe any kind of health ramifications from doing that?
I was not worried about health ramifications. At the time, I was trying to get my health together, so I was already eating a lot of fruits and vegetables. And ever since I was a kid, people always told me, what are the healthy foods? Fruits and vegetables. And so to be honest, it never occurred to me that I needed meat for anything. For some reason, the myth that you need meat for protein is never something that was ingrained in me. So I was very fortunate. And since I was already eating a lot of fruits and vegetables, the transition was very easy for me.
Wow. And did you notice anything different physiologically, mentally, emotionally after going vegan?
Yeah, so physically, I did not feel much better when I was vegan. I actually felt great before. I was relatively healthy, I was active, I ate healthy. So for me, that was not the biggest change. But emotionally, there was a huge shift for me. Because the way that I would put it is that becoming vegan, it felt to me like I was returning to who I am authentically. You know, I think back to who I was as a kid and how I related to animals. And I always loved them very much. I was fascinated by them. I wanted to spend time with them. And certainly, I hated to see them hurt. And even, I wouldn't also want to hurt them myself, right? And I realized that growing up, I forgot about that part of myself. And I just lived in a world where it was normal to eat the remains of an animal who had been killed. And I realized that as a kid, if I'd known that this is what we did to animals, I would have never wanted to be a part of it. And so it just felt like I was becoming myself. Like I never wanted to hurt anyone. And now I get to live by those values.
Wow, did you have pets as a kid?
I did not have pets as a kid. However, growing up, I was never really popular with people, really. You know, as a kid, you're in middle school, high school, all you think about is, I want to be popular. But I was popular with dogs, and some of my best friends growing up were dogs. In particular, my cousin's dog, his name was Simba, and he lived in Singapore, and every time I'd visit Singapore, he'd be the one that I'd be the most excited to see, and I loved him so much. I spent a lot of time with him, and he would always come. You know, I always saw that he was such an interesting character. He would actually wipe his paws before he came into the house, and I always found that so interesting and so endearing. And so, yeah, I think my connection with animals started very early.
Now, what about family? Did you have any difficulties with family going, going to maybe a holiday events or whatever, or just in general?
For sure. In general, it hasn't been too difficult with my family at all. I was very fortunate in multiple ways. First of all, when I decided to become vegan, I was actually in college at the time. And so what had just happened is that I decided to do this over the summer, and when I went back to college, that's when I changed. So my family wasn't around to criticize me or say, you can't do this, or what about this, or what about that. They just didn't know. It was only when I went back for the next vacation that I told them, oh, by the way, I'm vegan now, right? Yeah. And I remember my dad was a little bit resistant at the time. He was like, make sure you get enough protein. My mom as well, actually. But overall, they were very kind and very supportive. Now, certainly, they're very supportive. And yeah, my extended family, I don't see them that much. And when I do see them, sometimes we have family gatherings and we eat animal products, and they always ask me the same question. So are you still vegan? And I'm like, yes, I am. Like, I will always be.
You said we, but they eat animal.
They eat animals. I do not, yes.
Yeah. Do you have to prepare in a certain way, bring stuff, or do you do any of that, or eat before you go?
That's a good question. Sometimes I eat before I go. Sometimes I don't show up. No. But it's not necessarily just because of this. It's also because sometimes I make other plans. But in general, I just try not to make a big deal out of it. I'll eat what I can there and then just socialize. I mean, the point of these gatherings to me is more of a social thing and to meet the people, and I feel capable of doing that without having to have food on my personal plates. And if people ask me, I say, oh, I already ate, I'm not very hungry, stuff like that, and try not to make it a big deal and just have a good time.
Awesome. Yeah, I've seen you around so many different awesome places, LA, Arizona, probably somewhere else if I think about it, but I even saw you speak at a university in Arizona, and you had such an amazing presentation. You said something that I'll never forget. You said one of your biggest regrets was not necessarily not going vegan sooner, but it was not becoming an activist sooner. Sure. And that was the coolest thing. This is the first time I'd ever heard of that or thought of that. Is that still the same?
I definitely regret not becoming an activist sooner. And the reason why is because I found out in 2015 how bad animals have it and what kind of suffering we cause them. And very quickly, I realized that these animals are very similar to the dogs and cats that I grew up loving. And that being the case, what we did to them seemed so horrific. I felt a calling to do something about it, and I always wanted to help them. And I always thought to myself, I would love to spend my time and energy trying to help them and make the world a better place for them. And yet for 2.5 years, I did nothing. And the reason I did nothing was because, one, I didn't feel empowered. I just didn't feel like I could make a difference. It's like, who am I to make a difference? And two, I didn't know where to start. And so what happened is for 2.5 years, I would wake up every single day and I would think about the suffering that these animals endure. And then I would realize that I'm not doing anything about it. I'm just going about my life and not helping them. And that really hurt me. That, really made me feel like, it made me not like myself. I felt sad, I felt angry, I felt frustrated. And I had no one to share this with too. So all my friends, no one would understand. I didn't talk to any of them about it. And so I would just have to smile in front of them, pretend that everything was fine. But all I could think about was, I want to help these animals. So 2.5 years later, I finally found the courage to go to one event, which was a vigil, which is where you stand outside of a slaughterhouse and bear witness to the animals who go into the slaughterhouse. And the one I went to in Los Angeles, there were pigs coming in these huge pig trucks, and we were able to give them water. I almost didn't go to that one as well. I actually parked at the wrong spot because the organizers didn't tell us where to park, which I'm still angry at them for that. But I parked very far away, and I stood in my car, and I was like, I don't know if I want to go. I feel scared. I don't know anyone there. I don't like going to events alone. I don't even know where the meeting spot is. This thing seems massive. What if I walk to the wrong place and I never find them? So I almost didn't go, but I ended up going, and then I met incredible people who had the same values as me. They cared about the same things that I cared about. They cared about animals the way that I cared about them. They saw them as individuals the same way that I did, and they were actually doing things to help them. And that was so empowering to see other people doing this thing that I wanted to do. So I met a lot of them, and they introduced me to more people, to more events. I kept putting myself out there, trying different things, and that's how I eventually found my voice. But I really wish that I'd just taken that leap sooner. You know, it's never gonna be comfortable, but you gotta jump into it.
So vigils and speaking engagements, what other forms of activism do you do?
So I did a lot of things when I first started out, and I think that's important because you need to try different things. So I went to vigils, I did public outreach, like out on the streets, I did social media content, I tried to make videos, I also did things like disruptions, marches, I went to the Animal Liberation Conference in Berkeley, which was just this giant training for activists basically, where we learned so many different things. And eventually today I settled on doing educational content, you know, whether it be through speaking or through videos. And the reason I do that is actually not because I necessarily think it's the most important thing that we can do. It's because it just so happens that that's what I'm passionate about, and I think that I'm good at it. You know, it's aligning my skills, my passions with my vision, with what I want to accomplish. And for me, that's what's allowed me to have somewhat longevity, and I can see myself doing this for a very long time. And it's because I genuinely enjoy what I'm doing, and I think I can do it well.
Now, is that something people can contact you about and get you to come speak or do what you do where they are?
For sure, yeah. If there's any way that I can help you, I would love to, you know, drop me an email, which we'll leave somewhere in the description of this video.
Okay.
And yeah, get in touch. I mean,
you're based in France.
I'm based in France, you know, but we're all in the same team.
Yeah, and that's where we are right now, right? I wish. No. Today we're at what?
Today we're at the AVA Summit 2022, which is an incredible event, and there are so many people here who I just knew being in the movement. So many people have inspired my journey in so many ways, and it's incredible to meet them and learn from them. And for me, the AVA, or events like this where a lot of people gather from our movement, it's an opportunity to, one, connect and realize that we're all in the same team. We're all doing this together. We all care about the same things. And that's so empowering in and of itself. But also it's an opportunity to learn from others. Some people here have been working for animals for longer than I've been alive. And for me, it's so inspiring to be able to hear their stories and learn from them so that I can be even more effective for animals more quickly.
Why do you think some people quit?
That's an interesting question. I think different people quit for different reasons. And to me, I think that maybe one of the reasons is because people haven't found their voice. They haven't found what they're passionate about, what they're good about, or what they're good at. And so if you do something for a long time and you don't see results, I think it can be very difficult to stick to it. One of the reasons that I stuck to what I was doing was because I figured out what I was good at, and I saw results from what I was doing. I saw people who changed as a result of the work that I did, and I got feedback from people that said, "You're doing great work, keep it up." And that really kept me going, and that allowed me to see that, oh, what I'm doing is actually making a difference, so let me do it more. So I think it's really important that you put yourself in a position to win, not just for the animals, but for yourself, that you know that you're doing something where this is where you're supposed to be. Your skills, your passions align, and you're doing something that helps the animals.
And do you think some of it could also be, feeling alone, like maybe you did when you went to that first vigil? And it seems like you found a tribe of sorts.
Absolutely. I think that if not for the community of people around me, I would have never stuck it out this long, because it's so isolating to care about something and feel like you're all alone, to feel like everyone around you doesn't care as much as you do. And that's how I felt for 2.5 years. And I started thinking, am I the crazy one?
Yeah.
Am I the one who's wrong about this? Maybe it's not as much of a big deal as I thought it was.
Yeah.
I always felt like this is such an urgent matter. It needs to end yesterday.
Yeah.
And yet people around me seem to be like, oh, it's not that big of a deal, right? And I think it's very difficult to keep working and to believe in the work you do when that's who you're surrounding yourself with is going to be an uphill battle. And what I realized is that surrounding myself with people who have the same vision, who want to accomplish the same things as me, was just so helpful, because I felt like, oh, we're all doing this together. We're all going to keep going. We're never going to stop.
Could you be with somebody who isn't vegan?
Like romantically?
Sure.
I mean, I probably not, but I think that being vegan is not real. I mean, from a practical standpoint, I think that most of the people I meet are just going to be vegan because I don't have much of a social life, and I meet a lot of people through work that I do. But being vegan is not necessarily the yardstick through which I would measure someone's character, but it's rather things like compassion and open-mindedness and their willingness to change and their will to do good for the world. And I think that when you want to do good for the world, and you see what happens to animals, and you honestly put yourself in their position, then becoming vegan is something that is an obvious step that we need to take for them.
Yeah. You got a quote you want to share?
I want to share an unconventional quote, and it's one that in particular helps my work. And it's a quote from this guy called Seth Godin, who's actually a business guy. He writes like marketing books. I think he's brilliant, and he writes about how to connect people and how to do good in the world. And one of the quotes that he has is, "Make things better by making better things." And that's how I think about the work that I do, where part of my commitment with the content that I make is I don't want to waste people's time. And I want to make stuff that if people watch it, you see so much stuff on social media, it's oversaturated, and I feel like a lot of it, I watch it sometimes and I'm like, why did I watch this? I feel like this wasted my time, and I feel unhappy about it. And my commitment is to do the opposite of that if you're going to watch something that I do, you're going to get value from it. It's not going to waste your time. I want to make things better by making better things.
And then what are some of your channels, like your Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, all that?
Yeah, so you can find me at my name, Ryuji Chua. Which is probably spelled somewhere around here.
Okay.
But yeah, if you just search me, you shall find me.
Yeah, and you're on all those platforms, Instagram.
Yes, I'm mostly on Instagram and YouTube. Instagram, short form content. YouTube is where my longer work is, where I think that's where my best work is. My favorite work's on YouTube. And yeah, hope it brings you value if you check it out.
Cool, what's next? I'm curious.
What's next? Good question. Extension of what I just said earlier. I want to keep making things better by making better things. And hopefully my goal is to not just expose how much animals are suffering, but to change how people see animals. With animals in particular, like chickens and cows and pigs, we don't see them as a someone, we see them as a something. You see a chicken farm and they all look the same, right? But in fact, that's not the case. I remember the first time I realized this about chickens, I was at a wildlife rescue in Singapore, and I met these two chickens, Diggle and Dumpling. Diggle was a social butterfly. I mean, technically he was a social chicken. But what he would do is he would come up to you, eat food out of your hand, and peck at your clothes and hang out. Dumpling was the complete opposite. You take one step towards him and he'd get out of there. And I realized these animals are no different in all the ways that matter to the dogs and cats that I grew up loving. And I hope that that's something that I can communicate through my work.
Awesome. Well, I think you're doing a fantastic job, and it's always a pleasure meeting you. I've seen you so many times over the years, and I'm always excited to see you again.
Yeah, same with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, take care.